This week we begin a 4-part series of 4 Torah portions that we learn about Yosef, the righteous Yosef HaTzadik. And we read the fascinating story of the trials and tribulations of the life of Yosef, and how he went through 22 years of suffering. And we ask ourselves, how did this man overcome such challenges in his life and remain a positive, happy, loving, compassionate human being? First he's thrown into a pit, then he's sold into slavery, then he's falsely accused and thrown into prison in Egypt. And throughout all of this, he's always successful, he's an Ish Matzliach, he's always rises to the top, and he's always happy, and at the end of the story we know he lovingly forgives his brothers. What's the secret to Yosef? How does he do it? So there's a story told about 2 Hasidic brothers. Their names was Rabbi Zushin and Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk. They were very holy, pious Jews. They were once traveling through some towns in Poland, and they were raising money for poor Jews. And there were other beggars in town that didn't like that they were competing with them in the fundraising of that local town. So they went to the officials, they informed on them and had them arrested. And Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha, these 2 great Hasidic masters, find themselves in a prison cell with many other prisoners in some town in Poland. Anyways, they're there, comes in the morning, Rabbi Zusha sees his brother Rabbi Elimelech, the first morning of being in prison, is crying. So he turns to his brother, he says, don't you have faith in God? Why would you cry? Don't you have trust in Hashem? And Rabbi Elimelech says, I'm not crying because I'm in prison. I'm crying because it's morning, and normally I put on my tefillin at this time, my talis and tefillin, and I can't do that. Why? Because in this big prison cell, they had a bucket where all the prisoners would relieve themselves. And Jewish law says, in the presence of feces, you're not allowed to pray. So he says, it's time to put on my tefillin and my talis, but I can't do it because Jewish law forbids me in the presence of this bucket of feces. So I'm weeping that for the first time I can't put on tefillin. That's why I'm crying. So his brother Rabbi Zusha says something deep and profound to me. He says, listen, the same God that instructs us in the Torah not to put on tefillin when there's dirty materials in the cell, in the room, is the same Torah, the same rabbis, the same Jewish law that says that the same Jewish law that says you should have put on tefillin every day is the same law, that's the same Torah that says not to do it in the presence of feces. So therefore he says, when you put on your tefillin, you're connecting to God by putting on your tefillin. Today, when you don't put on your tefillin, you're making the same connection with God because you're doing what Hashem told you to do, either way. So what's the difference if you connect to Hashem by putting on tefillin because He told you to put on tefillin, or under these circumstances He tells you not to put on tefillin. So either way you're doing Hashem's will, either way you're connecting to God. When Rabbi Elimelech heard that, he said, you're right. He got up, he stopped crying, he started dancing and clapping and singing. The other prisoners, his brother started dancing with him. The other prisoners started dancing. The guards here singing and dancing in the prison cell. They never heard this. They come running. They see the prisoners are dancing. They call over one of the guys and say, well, what's this joy? What's the singing and the dancing? One of the prisoners says, I don't know what's going on, but it has something to do with that bucket in the corner, with the waste. The guard says, really? In that case, we'll confiscate it. They go in, they take the bucket, and they remove it from the cell. At that point, Rabbi Zusha turns to his brother Elimelech and says, now you can put on your tefillin and start davening. Yosef is in prison for many years in Egypt. And what does he teach us? He teaches us that wherever God puts you in life, Hashem put you in that circumstance. Be happy because Hashem gave you a purpose in that particular set of circumstances. And here's the key to Yosef's psychology. You know, there's something called narrative therapy. What's narrative therapy? Narrative therapy is we all have circumstances in life, but we are the narrator of the events in our life. We are the voice that narrates our life story. And the question is, how do you narrate your life story? 2 people could have the same circumstances, but one person could put a negative narrative on it and one could put a positive narrative on it. And it's how you narrate your story that determines your level of happiness. And here we find an amazing insight. When Yosef reveals himself to his brothers are frightened. And they're like so embarrassed, ashamed to face Yosef, who they threw into a pit and caused 22 years of suffering. And listen to what Yosef says to his brothers at the end of the story. He says, don't feel bad, because you did not sell me. He uses the word machartem. You didn't sell me into slavery, but rather God, shlachani, sent me into Egypt. You see the vast difference? If you were sold into slavery, you're a victim. You're a passive victim, like a piece of property being sold. You're powerless, you're a victim, you have self-pity, and you feel depressed and sad. But Joseph says, I don't see myself as a victim. I wasn't sold into slavery. I was not a powerless victim, a passive piece of material being sold like a slave. No. God sent me. I am an ambassador of God. I am an emissary of God. I was chosen for a mission to save the land of Egypt from famine. So rather than feel depressed and dejected, I feel chosen and elevated that God chose me to be the ruler over Egypt, to be the one to save the whole country and the world and my family from famine. I feel privileged to be given this role. And that's the way Yosef lived his life. He said, God put me in these circumstances. He chose this position for me. And therefore, I don't feel depressed. I feel happy and joyous that God entrusted me with these lofty dreams and this great mission in life. As someone once said, the holiday of Hanukkah is coming Sunday night, someone said, if life gives you potatoes, make latkes. The message of Hanukkah is when you look at your circumstances of life, look at for the light, not for the darkness, see the good and the positive.